We have drainage problems in our front garden, and in this video I'm going to be installing some channel drains in an attempt to resolve them. The channel drains are going to run from here over to here, where we have an inlet to a new soakaway that I've dug out recently. I didn't film any of that, but I do have a video about soakaways, which I'll leave a link to in the description box below. We're adding additional drainage here because we get some pooling water when it rains, mostly due to lots of rainwater being pushed into the garden by passing cars on the nearby road. First, I'm going to need to cut away some of this concrete to establish a straight line. I'd already marked it out using a chalk line. And by the way, this concrete slope needs redoing too, as the concrete has completely failed. It was done by a professional a few years ago now. It cost us a lot of money and the person responsible was meant to come and redo it. Needless to say, it's caused us a lot of stress, and after waiting well over a year, we decided to cut our losses and just get it done ourselves. More on that later in the video. So it was a lot easier to cut through this than it should have been. Then with the chisel bit fitted to the SDS drill, I can break up everything that I want to get rid of. This tool is called a mattock, and it's going to come in really handy on this project, mainly because the ground underneath this concrete, where I need to dig a big trench, is really well compacted. Right, let's talk channel drains. They're available in a bunch of different ratings. A15, which is suitable for pedestrians with a weight limit of 1.5 tonnes. B125, which is suitable for 12.5 tonnes. And that's what I've got here because they're suitable for things like driveways. And then beyond that, there's like the really heavy duty stuff. I've also got one of these silt traps. I think it's called a sump unit. And as you can see, it's much deeper. And the job of this is basically to collect any silt or debris that might come into the drain and stop that silt and debris getting to the soakaway. So once a year or something like that, I can take this grill off the top and scoop out any rubbish and chuck it away. As you can see, I've already connected this up to some 110mm drainage pipe, ready for connecting it up to the soakaway. I also picked up a couple of end caps, which slot on the end like so. One of my channel drains has arrived with a great big crack in it, which, considering this thing's supposed to be rated up to 12.5 tonnes, does worry me a bit, but I guess the strength from these really comes from the concrete that surrounds the channel drain. But as the damage on this only affects the very end, the first sort of 200mm, I think I can still get away with using this. The recommendation is to have 100mm or 4 inches of concrete on both sides and underneath the channel drains, which is where a lot of the strength is going to come from. However, I want to dig my trench to be 300mm or 1 foot wide, and that's because I want to create something that looks like this. It gives me space for some shuttering so that I can get a nice crisp edge. Then 100mm on one side and underneath the drains, but on the other side I just want a couple of inches here, and that's because later when the concrete slope of our driveway gets redone, that's going to fully support the other side. So that's the plan, and now it's time for the worst part of this project, digging. And this was a real struggle. None of my gardening tools were cutting the mustard, so I had to use my SDS drill again to break up the ground. I wanted to make sure that the bottom of my trench is left nice and square, so here I'm using the mattock just to chip away at the bottom corners. My trench ended up being dug out deeper than it really needs to be. As you can see here, it's around 320mm deep rather than the 250mm needed, so it'll be extra strong, and I had more than enough materials needed for the concrete. I found a long piece of 9mm plywood that I can use for the shuttering. I just ripped it in half at the table saw and then screwed some bits on the back to get the length I needed. A thicker plywood would have been much better for this, but I'm using what I have available. I also cut some stakes out of some scraps of wood. So the ply goes in and then I can hammer in the stakes and secure the ply to them with screws. And then I'm removing this temporary covering that I made just to cover a hole in the ground where the soakaway inlet is. The area where the sump unit is going to be needs to be dug out much deeper than the rest of the trench because it measures 400mm high and also needs 100mm of support surrounding it. So this hole ended up being just over 500mm deep. And this looks like it should work, so I went to fetch the cement mixer. To mix up my concrete, I've bought a ton of this stuff. This is sand with some 20mm gravel in, and it'll be perfect for mixing with cement. Using a mixed ballast like this is going to save me lots of time. I also picked up 5 bags of cement, which should be plenty. Here, I'm drilling out a couple of holes in the concrete driveway at the end of the trench, and I'm adding a couple of long concrete screws but leaving them sticking out by a couple of inches. This probably isn't necessary, to be honest, but I figured it'd provide some mechanical strength to help tie the 2 slabs together. I get some water in the mixer and then add 3 buckets of the ballast. Then 1 bucket of cement, and I'm holding my breath because of all that nasty airborne cement dust. And then a final bucket of ballast, so it's a 4-to-1 mix I'm using here. You could get a similar mix using 3 parts 20mm gravel, 2 parts sharp sand and 1 part cement. And then I can just add water until it looks right, and to me this looks right, wet enough to flow into all of the gaps but not too wet. I'm going to get the sump part fitted first, and I get some concrete in the hole first to bed it down onto. And I can remove this bag that I put around the inlet to stop debris getting in. I'm lubricating the end of the pipe with some silicone grease, and then I can wiggle it in place, which took a while actually, as these fittings can be tricky to get together. I've got more than enough fall on this pipe, which is good. The channel drains themselves don't need to be fitted with a fall, they can be installed horizontally, since it doesn't matter if water sits in them, but I'm going to install them with a very slight fall. The final drain can be cut to length to fit inside, and to stop the concrete from flowing inside the drain, I just wedged in one of the end caps off camera. One problem I had was that the weight of the concrete was starting to lift the channel drains higher than I wanted them to be, so I just applied some weights on top. To clean up the mixer, I throw in a couple of bricks and some water. And then I can start troweling the concrete. Really, I'd have liked to have left it a couple of hours before I did this, but it was getting late, so I just did the best I could with it wet like this. Right, so it's been a couple of days. The concrete should be dry by now. Let's find out. Not the tidiest, and in hindsight I really should have bought an edging trowel just to round over the corner, but this will be okay and it'll be more than strong enough. So then it was on to focusing on our concrete slope nightmare. The first job was to fit some salvaged steel box section that I cleaned up, primed and painted gloss black, and I bought some end caps for it. I'd already pre-drilled some countersunk holes in the steel, and here I'm just drilling into the concrete, and I'll fit these pieces using some concrete screws. The reason I'm installing this is because the old concrete that the professionals laid didn't have anything to bear against when it was laid, so over time it slumped and cracked and broke away, and this time I want a clean straight edge that was secure that we could lay the concrete up to. This is like a 5.5 metre span I think, so I had to do this in 2 lengths. With that done, we had to break up all the old concrete, and I want to thank my uncle for helping me with that. It took most of a day and it was pretty hard work getting it all broken up and cleared. Then I started shuttering everything. So here, for example, I used a roof batten with some stakes behind it. Elsewhere, I just used any bits of pine or sheet material that I could lay my hands on. And then on to laying the new concrete, which was done on a new day when the professional was meant to be back to do this. Basically, he cancelled on me on the day, and by this point I'd just decided I needed to get this done. So I called for help, and massive thanks to my brother and my dad for helping me here. This was another long day and hard work. We were aiming to get the concrete about 2 inches thick at the top and bottom, but in the middle it probably ended up closer to 3 or 4 inches. We had to lay it in kind of a U shape because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to reach the middle section. It actually looked pretty good once troweled, but the old concrete had had a troweled finish and it was really slippery and dangerous when it got icy, so we wanted to add a rough texture to the new concrete, and the only way we could figure out how to do that was to run a broom over it. This definitely would have worked better if we could have left it longer to go off, but then obviously we wouldn't have been able to reach the middle section. A tampered finish would have been nicer and it would have levelled everything off nicely, but we tried it and it just wasn't working out. Access was difficult on one side and it was just really tricky. To be honest, I didn't really like the way it looked when I ran the broom over it. It was just the best option we had. It also created lots of loose bits, but we hoped that once this was dry, we could clean up the loose bits easily enough. At the end, I ran a trowel around all the edges just to give it a bit more of a finished look. And then we left the concrete alone for a couple of days to start curing. Unfortunately, this was one of those jobs that was never going to turn out perfect. Me and my brother have limited experience doing this kind of work. My dad shouldn't even be lifting 25-kilogram bags of cement at his age, to be honest, but he did an amazing job loading the mixers for us. And by this point, it probably sounds like I'm just making up excuses, but we also didn't have enough material to complete the work, which again was down to the guy that was meant to be doing the work, as we wanted the slope to be thicker in the middle to ease the gradient of the slope. So it was a job that was all about compromises really, and I'm sure that people who have been watching my channel for a while can sense just how frustrated and fed up I am with this whole situation. And I think the lesson that I've learned over the years, not just on this project, but if you look back at the roofing project we had a while back, where we had a similar situation of being let down, although they apologised and put things right, so no hard feelings, or even the guys we paid to replace our guttering, soffits and fascia boards who couldn't even be bothered to connect the downpipes up to the pipe in the ground. And that wasn't the only one either, because I've noticed recently that this one isn't right either. Anyway, the lesson is that maybe some tradespeople might be more skilled or more knowledgeable than the average homeowner or DIYer, but it's unlikely that they're going to care about the job as much as you care about it. And that's why I will always choose to DIY from now on over hiring someone else. There are, of course, some amazing tradespeople out there, and I'm fortunate to know some amazing ones myself, like Robin Clevitt, for example, who did the timber work for our new roof, or the plumber or plasterer that we've been using over the last few years. Those people are like gold dust. So while our driveway slope may not be perfect, it's done, and sometimes that's enough. Hopefully it won't fall to bits this time. This area here will need haunching down to the drain to make sure that the concrete is fully supported and strong. But before I do that, I couldn't resist checking to see if the sump unit thing was collecting debris from the driveway. And it looks like it's doing a good job. So then onto the haunching, and I'm using another 4:1 mix. Off camera, I also primed the edge of the concrete just to reduce the suction from the new concrete that I'm laying here. And a bit of gaffer tape helped to keep my grills mostly clean. And you'll see I also added this end detail here with concrete. I'd love to say that that was the job complete, but no, there's more to do. All the gravel here was a real mess, and the ground level here is also too high. So, yet more digging to be done. And then I spent several hours separating all of the soil from the gravel, and then washing the gravel. I made a short video about broken trug buckets recently, which I know resonated with people because it got over 3 million views across all platforms. And somebody got in touch asking if they could send me some of their trug buckets with reinforced unbreakable handles, which I've been using throughout this project. And these are a world apart from these ones, which just don't last 5 minutes. And these are not much more expensive either. I was even sent a video of 2 vans playing tug of war with the handles on these. So I'll leave a link to these in the description box if you want to check them out. And I think it's an affiliate thing, so I might earn a small commission on any purchases. Thank you. And finally, the satisfying part, putting all of the clean gravel back in place. So here it is. Don't look too close, there are trowel marks and blemishes, but it's obviously infinitely better than what we had before. And in terms of drainage, everything seems to be working well, although we are yet to have a really heavy downpour. Thanks for watching.